Welcome to the All for Literacy podcast, hosted by Dr. Liz Brooke, welcoming established and emerging voices in literacy education and the science of reading. Explore with us the connections between literacy research, educators' knowledge and skills, and the implementation into classroom instruction.
I know we're making progress, but I don't know, is it good enough? Is this sufficient progress?
You've just heard Margaret Goldberg, literacy coach and co-founder of Right to Read. Today, Margaret joins Dr. Liz Brooke in a conversation about literacy advocacy and the pursuit of equity through literacy. Here's your host, Dr. Liz Brooke.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the All for Literacy podcast. Today, I am joined by Margaret Goldberg, the co-founder of the Right to Read project and literacy coach in California at Nystrom Elementary School, and Dr. Elsa Cárdenas-Hagan, president of the Valley Speech, Language, and Learning Center in Brownsville, Texas, as well as a research associate with the Times Center at University of Houston. So welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for taking some time to talk with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, we're very happy to be here.
So as you listeners know, on this podcast, we try to connect the research to the practice. And so today we have some of the experts, top experts in the research to practice connection. And there's been a lot happening in our country the last few days, last week, around research, around IES, Institute of Education Science, other centers being closed and research grants being talked about. And so, as you may know, Lexia was founded 40 years ago with an NICHD grant, a research grant. And so we know the importance of research. And so we just want to help educate our listeners on what some of these latest decisions might mean, and also talk about the wonderful partnership that is established between our practitioners and our researchers. But before we jump into all of that, we always like to start asking our guests, what got you interested in education? And I know, Elsa, you're a fellow speech-language pathologist. Yes. So I just love to start there, and what makes you passionate about, literacy for all, the Right to Read project, all of that. What brought you to education and then ultimately to be a researcher?
That's right. So as a speech and language pathologist, we know so much about language and young children's development. And I live along the Texas-Mexico border, and I had been in Houston for so many years, and moving back down there really saw that there was such a need for the students who have a home language for that school district, Spanish. It was their home language. And really, I was intrigued by how can we do better to improve their language outcomes, their literacy outcomes, their learning outcomes. And so through that, became much of an advocate and went back to learn about how to teach reading. And, I was so fortunate to get that opportunity. But as you talk about that, I really started seeing children, and I thought, they don't all have language disorders, and they don't all have reading disorders. That can't be. What it is we have to improve literacy, and I needed to become an expert in that. And so, but through that work and through the research, we, had been so great to have that research. But in doing that work, really turned around an entire community to where we turned around and students, an 84% reduction referrals to special education because the students now had the tools. And that is getting close. I was trying to think of how long that's been. It's getting close to 25 years of work. Wow. And 25 years of success.
Wow, I love that. And I love of work and success. And it is an ongoing process, and that's why research plays such an important role to learn what's working, what's not working, and especially taking the results that oftentimes are done in a more controlled environment to bring to to the schools. So tell us a little bit, Margaret, about your story and what brought you to education.
I mean, I think I was in denial for a while, but it was pretty clear I was always going to be a teacher. I remember at one point I came home from school and I was complaining to my mom about my teacher, and she's like, well, if you think you can do better, then you probably should. Okay, so I knew graduating from college I wanted to become a teacher. I went to a teacher preparation program, a master's program that was 2 years, because I wanted to do as much student teaching as possible. I wanted to get as much support as possible because I wanted to set out to have a lifelong career in education. And I didn't realize that I was severely underprepared. In my first few years even, I struggled, with the basic things of being a beginning teacher, classroom management, stacks of papers. We need to learn how to do a bulletin board. They didn't teach us that in teacher prep. But I was working in a high-performing school as a 4th grade teacher, and so I didn't need to confront the fact that I didn't know how to teach reading. Most of my students came to me already reading, or they went to a reading interventionist down the hallway. And so it wasn't until I took a leap, I think it might have been 8 or so years into my career, that I switched to the lowest performing school in a big urban district nearby. And I came in as a coach and an interventionist. And I thought that the things that I had been doing that were working in my other school would come and turn this school around. And I was humbled probably within 2 weeks. I think I realized oh, I actually do not know what I'm doing. And I had all of these questions what are reasonable literacy rates? What percentage of students can we actually expect to be able to read? Why is it so hard to teach kids how to get the words up off the page and to be able to say them? And I ended up spending a good portion of time doing a massive amount of Google research trying to get these questions answered. And so where I am right now is feeling pretty confident in the implementation at my current elementary school for foundational skills instruction. And the area that I'm most excited to be exploring is language.
Great.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience, graduated, feeling excited. My mom had been a teacher for 40 years, and I was teaching 1st grade, which, to your point, 4th grade, usually kids, hopefully by then, but 1st grade, it's pretty important, right, to know how to teach reading. I didn't even know what I didn't know at the time. We didn't have actually a reading program in the school. I had 2 teachers on either side of me who taught for 25 years, and so I was kind of just following them.
Yeah, me too.
And it wasn't until I went back to school to become a speech-language pathologist and reading specialist that I actually learned the full science about learning to read. And then I actually went back to that same school and I was their speech-language pathologist and got to see a lot of those kids. But I know we have a lot of teachers in this country that have had that experience, that they didn't get the training that they needed. And now more and more teachers are getting it through different professional learning opportunities. But that understanding the why we're doing the things we're doing, I think is so important. And that's where, again, the research, trying to figure out what's the best way to get the teachers the knowledge they need, right? And so when I think about partnerships between researchers and the schools, can you guys talk a little bit about your experiences working with schools for you and researchers for you, and if you guys have done any collaboration yourselves, but let's start about how does that partnership begin?
I love being in schools. I live in schools. But what is so beautiful is the relationship building, very important, and the trust building. And the realization that we're partners and that we all want the same things. We all want for our students to succeed. And what's so beautiful about that is the learning that's bi-directional. We learn from the teachers and administrators and leaders just as much as they learn from the science of the research that we've conducted. And our research is ever changing. So we, come in with, these are kind of the practices we know have worked in other places, but we want to see, every district is different, every setting is different. How do we need to differentiate? What are the key components that must be in every classroom? It's a bi-directional kind of relationship. We learn from each other, we build together, we look to see what's working, and we make adjustments. But that's what we do in our classrooms every day as we work with children from all different backgrounds and all different languages. And what's so exciting is to see the children thrive and see the schools thrive and see them become the leader. And I just want to share something that happened here actually at Plain Talk.
Yes.
We had a session with, one of the school districts was New York City Public School Districts, and there was the superintendent along with me, and the principal and the teacher and the central office multilingual department head. And what was so amazing is after we shared the work, the people in Plain Talk, the participants came and rushed all of them, and I was not approached at all. And I love that.
Yes.
Because it has empowered. They are now the experts. They are now mentoring other schools. They are now leaders. And that's really building capacity, sustainability, scalability. So seeing that happen and just the results that we're getting, very positive results, so exciting.
Well, and that idea of sustainability and scalability is so important. And what a great example of the power of that. And Margaret, I'd love to hear your stories and thinking about, your experiences and some about how you think about sustainability and scalability.
Yeah, so I think it had been several years that I was sort of shopping around trying to find a scientist that I could have as like my BFF and we could work together. And someone sent me, I think it was this podcast, and it was an interview with Tiffany Hogan and Emily Hanford. And there was a point at which they were talking about a blog that I had written about how the culture of scientific conferences and communication is really different than that of teachers. And just what it was like for me going from the warm, fuzzy experience of the balanced literacy community to getting plunked into conferences where the language being used to describe teachers was really different than and sometimes harsh. So anyways, they were talking about that. And I was like, oh, Tiffany Hogan seems really great. And she was, just sounding like she really wanted to be involved in the work of schools. I'm going to call her bluff. So I emailed her. I was like, I just heard this podcast, and I was just sort of wondering if you might want to talk. I don't know what I said. And so we ended up hopping on a Zoom pretty shortly after that. And I asked all sorts of questions that I had just wanted to know the answer to, like, am I right that so much more has been learned about the foundational skills side of things? Are we much further along with implementation when it comes to word recognition than language? I had all of these like pretty basic questions, and she was so patient explaining it to me. And she started talking about the Reading for Understanding initiative and how the government had invested over $113 million in trying to understand how language develops and how to best support students in raising their language comprehension. And I had never heard of it before. And she ended up sending me an infographic that I looked at, and I was like, how can so much money have been spent on so much research and so many effective practices identified and curriculum developed, and it never reached me? Because I had been trying to find it, right? And she started talking about how, well, we developed the program and we thought if it was freely available and we posted it on the website, that teachers would come and find it. I was like, and she's like, and obviously that's not how it worked. Like, we didn't get the reach or the dissemination that we had wanted. So that's the next step of the research, to start to figure out how to disseminate what is known more thoroughly and to be able to gather more information about what it's like when you try to apply these things in the field. And at some point in time, she started offering my school so many things. She sent us curriculum, she sent us doctoral students to train our teachers. She gave us professional development via Zoom so we could learn about developmental language disorder and what to look for in our students. I got to fly to her lab and talk with her team about our data. I remember sitting in the room and I was showing our Dibbles data, and I was like, I know we're making progress, but I don't know, is it good enough? Like, is this sufficient progress? I don't know other schools that are doing it the way that we're doing it. And I remember one of her teammates saying, like, we don't usually see data like this. And I was like, huh? Like, this is really good. Yeah. And I almost started crying just to like get that affirmation from people who care about hard facts and care about objective data, that they could say like, objectively, this is really good work. Yeah. And so, yeah, we just put in a grant into NIH to try to work on the implementation of MTSS for language at my school.
Those multi-tiered system support are so important, right?
So important. And I just want to pick up on a few things. Tiffany Hogan is amazing, another SLP, right? She's been on the podcast on our original episode with Emily, and then we have a whole episode with her. And then on that podcast, she mentioned your blog. I think teachers won't embrace research until research embraces them. Is that? Mm-hmm. I love that blog. Since I've learned about it, I've used it everywhere. In fact, with the chancellor in New York City. Oh, good. Because there was a lot of blame. And, you know, as a teacher, as I started off telling you, I was one of those teachers. And the guilt that you feel when you finally learn what you need to know. So it's like, let's take that blame away. And even I was blaming a lot of the higher ed institutes. And I was like, well, the professors are just teaching what they knew. So let's just take all the blame away and focus on getting the knowledge out there. And now that we know better, we'll do better, right, Maya Angelou? So I appreciate that blog, because it is, a lot of teachers felt very knowledgeable. They were the experts in the balanced literacy world, and now they're feeling very oftentimes intimidated or blamed, or like that there's no love of reading in science. So thank you for that blog, and we've shared it with all of our listeners since. But the piece that you talked about in terms of the research, how come I didn't know about this, right? And dissemination is a big part of why we're doing this podcast, is to get some of that out. So can you talk a little bit, Elsa, about...
So it's so interesting that you mentioned that, and you're right, about, where do you go for the information that's given in a very practical manner, where we cannot take in all the information. Maybe someone like you can, Margaret, but we need to really be mindful of where we are in this process and where educators are. And so that taking bit by bit, here's some of the first things. Let's reflect on those. Let's go and practice those. And we have the regional educational laboratories that are also under the United States Department of Education, which there's 10 of them that, really help school districts and will work very partnership with the school districts. And I was on one of the advisory boards of the REL, and they were trying to disseminate all the work that they did. And one of the things that they found out in that research was, how do we get this information into the hands of the practitioners that need it? And what they found out is you go to conferences where the teachers are. Yeah, right. And that's where we are right now, at Plain Talk. And it's conferences like these that where you can, meet with folks, we meet with the practitioners, we meet with the researchers, and here is where we also have the discussions. And yes, these podcasts and the work and the blogs that you've done, that is also, it's a new way of delivering. But what we're doing here this week really makes a difference, with more than 3,000 educators here, and the buzz and the learning, and then going back to your districts and sharing that information. So important.
Yes. And I'm so glad you brought up the Regional Education Labs, or REL. The work they do, one was out of Florida Center for Reading Research when I was down there. And, you know, those practice guides or those executive summaries, right? There's IES practice guides that really take, you know, I always say, like, what are the top 3 or 5 things I should know if I'm, especially like working with adolescent literacy. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit more, again, in some of the light of the recent events, what do those different agencies, if you will, those practice guides, the RELs across, mm-hmm. you said there's 10 of them.
Right.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about some of these different organizations and what types of resources
Right.
they are?
Before you, so I want Elsa to share the workings behind it. And before you do that, I just want to say that those are the places that I go to get reliable information that is clear. And the information that I gather from those sources, I know I'm on solid ground. There's lots of studies that you can read where they haven't been replicated or where people are innovating and learning new things. But when I want something where the consensus has been reached and the information is ready for practitioners to go with confidence, mm-hmm. those are the sources that I go to. I go to the IES practice guides. I go to the REL websites. And so, Elsa, will you share what's the workings behind those?
So what's so amazing, you just talking about, I didn't know where to go. And educators know where to go now, mm-hmm. right? And they know these are the trusted source, you know, these are the trusted, because there's a lot of research out there that I frankly think, how did they even make it to be published? Right. Because it's not on solid ground, right? And you know, through the regional educational laboratories, the 10 of them in our United States, and through the Institute for Education Sciences and those practice guides, you know, wow, a panel of experts, all of these great minds have really, you know, what they've done is they've looked at everything that's available. They took the best of what we know and they come up with very solid recommendations. You know, typically in those IES practice guides, we have like 5 recommendations. Right. Yeah, really, and you're mentioning, powerful. You know, so right now we were working on one with Nicole Patton-Terry was our chairperson, and through a panel of experts about K through 3 and working with multilingual students and working what we should be doing in the core instruction. And those are so important. I went to look at the website just to see what's available, and right on the main page are 30, and looking at adolescent literacy, looking at multilingual students, looking at, you know, mathematics, looking at, you know, how do you develop vocabulary, reading for understanding, so many behavior. Yeah, how do we manage behavior?
Also, I was in Anita's Archer session yesterday, and she was talking about the practice guides and saying to everybody, go and download them because they may be gone.
Well, I really hope not. We cannot lose that, you know, the partnership that we have, you know, the IES and, you know, the RELs, mm-hmm. they support school districts. What's the motto of the REL? I mean, I just downloaded it myself, and the REL is to work in partnership with the school districts, mm-hmm. in partnership with them, in partnership with the state departments, in partnership with the locals, and so to really develop the strong academic outcomes that we're looking for, but making sure that we're using data, like what you're talking about, to improve those academic mm-hmm. outcomes, a very, you know, kind of scientific manner. And this is where we go for information. This is where all, you know, school leaders go, also communities and people that are trying to do reform efforts in their own communities. They know these are the trusted resources, because the experts across our country have gathered together to make sure that we have the information, and they're so simple to read. Here's 5. These are the first 3 or 4. They have the strongest evidence. This one has moderate evidence. So, you know, beware of that. But we keep moving forward. We cannot stay static. And that's why this is so important. The work is important.
Absolutely. And that's another thing we've been talking a lot on the podcast about. The science of reading is not done. It's not, you know, new. Certainly it's over 50 years of research. And to your point, we're always learning more. We're incorporating new aspects of the environment that wasn't present in the past. So we hope that those websites don't go down and those resources, because they're so incredibly valuable, and we are starting to make some real traction with teaching students using the evidence. And I think one of the things too, the NAEP results just recently came out, and people I think are thinking that this focus on science of reading will be instant, that we should see the results overnight. And so if we don't see the results overnight, we must be doing something wrong. Let's change that. So I think we're at a very interesting crossroads, I think, in our country. And hopefully this idea of, if students have been learning in a way that's maybe not as effective for many, many years, we need to give it some time. And like you said, these expert guides are looking at not just one study, but studies that have been replicated, multiple studies, pulling together the best, telling us which ones do have the most evidence and which ones don't.
And in many cases, we have national reports that came out of like the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, the Institute for Education Sciences, telling us, wow, we reviewed 2,000 studies. And from those 2,000 studies, this is what we have learned. And so these are the effective practices. But you're right. The science of reading is not static. It is not static. And as we learn, and as we also learn about, digital, the digital technology and what's going to happen with AI and the brain and development and language and reading and learning, we have to, continue that work. And, it's very exciting.
I feel like there's a misconception that a lot of teachers have, which is that the science of reading is promising 95% of our students will read at grade level. And when you actually dig into the research, what you find is that the promise is that we, with the information and tools that we have and the systems that we're able to set up now, are able to get, in theory, 95% of our students to read at a level limited by their language comprehension. And when you hear that, you realize, well, we need to learn how to be able to raise students' language abilities. We need to learn how to develop language screeners to find out which students are at risk for reading difficulties because of the language delays they may be experiencing or language challenges. That we need to be able to figure out how, after screening, we're providing intervention in the dosages that the students need in order to be able to make that progress. There's so many things, and currently practitioners don't have the tools to do that. We don't have the resources that we need on the language side of things that we do on the foundational skills side of things. And so when I think about the possibility of this work stopping now, it will stop in a way that makes it so only children who had word recognition difficulties get their needs addressed. But what about all of the other students who need school to be able to teach them academic language to be able to thrive and have the promise of all of the things that are open to you when you become literate?
And I want to say something very important about that. And what I talk to teachers about is that you're a language teacher, you're a literacy teacher, and you're a content expert. So we have to teach all three. And you're right. Even as, people like Tiffany Hogan and others work on really developing, these language screeners, but then what do you do about it? And so I think, just from the work that we've been doing, we've actually worked with teachers on collecting and understanding language samples, and how to be very diagnostic and prescriptive in that, and having very intentional ways, kind of like how we work in speech and language. And, one of the comments by, some of the school leaders are like, I never thought that was possible, that we could be doing that. And he says, it has turned our school around, because now we understand language. We understand how we can, get that understanding of language and the expression of language and how that applies to comprehension. And you're right. there's so many variables in getting to that deep reading comprehension, but we can't forget about the language foundations.
It's not just phonics.
No.
Yeah.
And the science of reading is not just phonics, but, just understanding how, it's not so systematized, right? And you have to look at every student. And students, for example, I work with students who are multilingual and understanding, they have so much language background in this one language, and, do our screeners look across the languages you can't get a complete picture unless you look across languages to see about them. So it's really being very purposeful in the development of language, development of comprehension, that background knowledge, so important.
You mentioned multilingual learners, and one of the things, we had Claude Goldenberg on one episode, and, I often hear one of the biggest misconceptions, the science of reading is not for emergent bilinguals.
Right.
Can you respond to that misconception?
When they say the science of reading did not ever include any students who were multilingual, I'm like, that's all. I'm like, Sharon Vaughn, we've worked on this all together. And, you can't go in this country without, having students who, have this beauty of more than one language. And you go to other countries, how many languages do you speak? 3, 4? Right. And, just think about the cognition that it takes to be able to do that, and how great we're using our brain. But one of the things the other thing that has been said is that we never did it in core instruction, that we only did it through special education. And that just is not the case, that we have worked in the general education classrooms, in those small intervention groups, and in the very intense, students who, we found students who were in very great need, and, when you give them what they need, you find it early, then they soar. Yes. And so, that is the misconception, that we don't have the body of evidence. This science of reading is the body of evidence. It's the why behind the what that we do. And, we're really working more on the how we scale and scale it up. But very clearly, these students have been included in the studies. We've had studies directed only to them. And, we've worked on it through a multi-tiered system of support. And it works for them with adjustments. Adjustments for what? The adjustments for where they are in their language, where they are in their literacy, and using that cross-language connections as an asset, and it makes more sense, and we can quickly get to multiliteracy.
Yes, and that it is an asset.
It's an asset.
Not a deficit.
The only reason I have the job I do is because I think about that. The job that I do is because of that as an asset, of knowing about, these multiple languages and how to make those connections.